I really don't care what Donald Trump's doing. I'm not anxiety. This is not this. I am not wringing my hands.
You don't have to
I'm
care.
not wringing my hands. My point is that this is what the church should now be doing. This is the opportunity to now be the church
get to be
for
faithful.
all of those
That's it.
poor, marginalized, exploited
That's
people
it.
who are being harmed by whatever he's doing. He doesn't bother me.
And so how we're organizing is in such a way where the majority of the resource we bring in, like 75% of that goes out the door to actually meet material needs, to stand materially with our neighbors.
Jesus says, can't put new wine in an old wineskin. He does not say anything's wrong with the old wineskin or the old
That's
wine.
real good.
That's it.
He just says you can't put the new wine in that old wineskin.
Yeah. Questlove did a series on the Black Genius, but just this idea that suffering and the history of suffering requires the imagination to see things that can't otherwise be seen.
That's right.
Yep.
So that's what I hear
Yes.
is a kind of collective genius here that you're bearing witness to.
Part of Robert, as he shared earlier, is non-reactionary responses to things that are happening in our world is because he sat with dads, aunts who lived through the shitstorm in seasons past and still produced beautiful things.
So those are some clips from the upcoming 2 episodes. This is a conversation that I recorded up here in my studio with Keith Reynolds and Robert Caldwell. Keith is not only one of my closest brothers and collaborators, he is the Associate Director of Admissions at Western Theological Seminary, and he will be joining me and Dr. Michelle Lloyd Page to teach and offer mentoring in a soon-to-be-launched Doctorate of Ministry cohort that I have titled Contemplation and Justice for All God's People, a New Reality in Belonging. Keith also serves as a board member for the Invitation Center, and he has likewise invited me to join a group of his friends who are discerning how to plant a church today in this world we live in here in Holland, Michigan. Now, I want to invite you to hang on to your seats because this is not like any church plant that I have ever heard of. I'm excited for you to hear more about Keith's vision. I'm aware you may have no interest in church planting whatsoever. You may have no interest in organized religion as well. And yet, even still, in these next 3 episodes, I'm inviting you to notice God in and through Keith and his longtime mentor, Robert Caldwell. As you'll learn in this first episode, Robert has been finding God in a rougher side of Columbus, Ohio. This first episode serves as something of an orientation where Robert offers us a deeper and more extensive overview of his story, and then Keith maps out his vision for church planting. In the subsequent episodes, we discuss things like the crazy creativity of the Holy Spirit, what it means to be surrendered to God, and then at the end of the 3rd episode, I ask these men to help me understand the nature of the Black genius. This is the idea that when a people group is oppressed, they are forced by necessity to imagine new possibilities that the rest of us have not yet considered. If we're honest with ourselves, there are many reasons for us to despair today. The news cycle is brutal. What I'm attempting to offer in these 3 episodes is a way for us to turn from the bad news and to get inside of the good news. I'm inviting you to join me in practicing a subversive act of hope. And I'll continue to be honest, though. This kind of hope requires a bit of work and patience. The bad news is served to us today on the platter of our algorithms. Most of us are trapped within the bad news. And I'm speaking of myself included. We are addicted to doom scrolling. In the next 3 episodes, I'm inviting you to dislodge yourself from the story that the world is cruel, and to go on a journey of listening for God, of listening with me for the good news in and through these 2 brothers. To offer you some more context, to let you know how I think about these things. In 2018, PBS invited Americans to vote for their favorite novel. To Kill a Mockingbird took the first place, beating out other popular books like Outlander, Harry Potter, and Pride and Prejudice. This is significant because at the core of To Kill a Mockingbird is a story about a privileged, educated white man's ability to see the world through the struggle of a poor, oppressed black field hand. Toward the end of the book, Scout, the main character, recalls the wisdom of her father, Atticus Finch. She recalls him saying, "You never really know a man until you stand in his shoes and walk around in them." To Kill a Mockingbird was published in 1960, and 50 years later, theologian James Cone published his own groundbreaking book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, where he laments the white church's inability to understand the literal similarities between the over 4,000 killings of Black Americans between the end of the 1800s and 1950. Cone writes, "There can be no theology of the cross that is not a theology of the lynching tree. Yet the white church in America preached the cross while ignoring the lynching tree right outside its windows." Cone reduces the spiritual sickness to the white person's inability to do what Atticus Finch did with Tom Robinson, our inability to put on the shoes of our neighbor and to walk around in them for a little while. Some of my friends and family, along with some Invitation podcast listeners, have had trouble understanding why, as a spiritual director, I spend so much of my energy on racial and social justice. It's easy for some to dismiss what I'm up to write it all off as some kind of progressive liberal agenda. And I want to say sincerely that all I'm attempting to do is to try and understand and respond to the life and teachings of Jesus. I'm doing my best through the Invitation Center and this podcast to keep telling the story of what I'm learning about following Jesus at the vital intersection of contemplation and justice. In my last season of podcasting, I was working with my friend Cammie Beecroft-Mann to work out my conviction that spiritual direction can solve almost all the world's problems. My argument is that our deepest inner spiritual self is essentially connected to our outer political self. I return again to what Cornel West has said, that justice is what love looks like out in the streets. What that means to me is that love is love is love. This is in the core of our Christian faith. In the Shema from Deuteronomy 6, that how I love God is essentially connected to how I love my neighbor, and how I love my neighbor is connected to how I love myself. The first and second commandments name 3 arenas of loving. How I love God is connected to how I love my neighbor, and how I love my neighbor is connected to how I love myself, and how I love myself is connected to how I love God. What that practically means is that my practice of spiritual direction is an exercise of listening to, of beholding the sacred dignity of another person. And this is what I'm inviting you to practice with me, Keith and Robert. The Holy Spirit invites us to pay attention to racial, social justice, because attending to our neighbor, this is the essence of becoming like Jesus, who was in his very nature equal with God, yet he did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. In another translation, something to be exploited, but instead he emptied himself. This is Philippians 2, where Paul earlier invites us to do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. Here again, the invitation is to listen well to our neighbors, to put on their shoes, to decenter ourselves, to become less so that we can elevate, celebrate, honor the dignity of others. In these next episodes, I'm inviting you to slow down, to listen to yourself, to listen to God, and to put on the shoes of another and to walk around in them for a little while. Amen.
You know, I mean, I haven't, like I was telling Keith, I have not jumped into the fray. I haven't posted on Facebook in 2 years. I don't do any of that anymore. But I do have conversations in spaces where you could actually have a conversation. As opposed to all that other stuff. And so that's what I'm trying to do. This is, it's close to my heart for sure, but it's like, let's build a community of folks who are going to sustain this season of life. Let's actually be the church the way we were supposed to be.
Yeah, that's what I was just saying. Like, let's lament, but what's our creative response?
That's it.
Like, we take this energy and then we do something with that to offer the solutions. And that's why it's great to have you here, as Keith has talked about you, and to be able to have you here. How much has he told you a little bit about me and what we're doing?
Just a little bit as we drove up in the park. So
just to frame the conversation. So first of all, I'm a crazy person.
Okay.
I wear that proudly. What I mean by that is creative musician. And then I was in campus ministry at Hope College for a decade, adjunct prof. And then I trained as a spiritual director with the Catholic nuns in Grand Rapids. And then suddenly was thrust into a practice of group listening in a prison in Muskegon for the 6 years leading up to the pandemic. And that experience of listening for God in a group of incarcerated men shifted everything for me. I thought I knew I was a worship leader for this college, and I thought I had my bearings, but it was such a blessed gift. And so much of the journey of the Spirit leading me to know Keith is reestablishing my sense of balance in my world. And so the way you're talking about your ancestors, parents, grandparents, it's what I've said to Keith is it's not that I fully understand the experience of a person of color in America, but when I hear them talk about it, I find hope.
That's it. If
they can, as you're saying, find sanity and move ahead creatively, then maybe I can too. And then also that I'm not crazy. That what I've sensed in my dissertation was in toxic masculinity and the mode of white body supremacy. So that vocab coming from a therapist in Minneapolis, Resma Monicum. So white supremacy is not non-cognitive, it's generational trauma, that's in our bodies. So as I see all that, I'm like, that's what's been crazy for me to try to understand a white dominant, male dominant way of doing Jesus. And so Keith has become like, I keep saying every year, is my new best friend. It's been a couple of years. So that's just a little bit about, and I've been doing some podcasting, and we'll be launching a doctoral program. He's going to be teaching with me at the seminary. And so that is in this whole arena of deep inner formation and racial justice. So, but I am here because I wanted to be able to amplify my brother's story and what he's interested in. And then he thought of you. So why don't you tell?
Yeah.
Do you want to introduce him? Do you want to introduce yourself?
So just to get it clean,
Yeah.
I'll let him do what you just did, talk about what it is that he's done.
Yeah.
And then I'll just share like what he has done, which is results in who he is.
Yeah.
And its significance to me and my life and our relationship. That
Yeah.
cool?
Great.
So you want to just kind of go like the arc of your career?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I can, I'll start because I've been sharing this pretty much all this calendar year, but this calendar year, and in specific, July 15th was 40 years since I surrendered my life to God.
Yeah.
And I grew up in church, like a lot of people in my generation, and certainly believed in God, had no reason not to believe in God. It was the only thing that I had, been exposed to or encountered. Grandparents, children of sharecroppers, always went to church. My grandmothers were strong influences on me. And I certainly believed in God, but I mean, I didn't really, it was like a cultural thing, I guess. I mean, I certainly believed, and I'll share in some other context some of the encounters I had with God even prior to that. But at age 25, I found myself, after 2 years of sort of running away from God, because it was clear to me that He was on me. It was something that He had for my life. And I finally surrendered to that 40 years ago on July 15th, living in Washington, D.C. And I share that because my early years as a 20-something, getting some insight, not unlike Moses did, he thought, Moses knew that he was a called person. And so he takes matters into his own hands, and, then, the story. So it's sort of poetic way. Yeah. I started my early life, zealously doing ministry and trying to do things and figure out stuff. And I'll try to make this not as long as it is, but I want to make sure I highlight sort of the key phases of this 40-year journey so that it all kind of makes sense. But in those early years, I had no idea that I can do something other than being a pastor in a robe, preaching a sermon on a Sunday morning. I had no other point of reference for what being called by God meant. And my grandmothers, both of them, were the ones who probably had the most influence on me. And one of them said, you should go to seminary. So I did. And so I started that, but young man, zealous, arrogant. I just started trying to do what I thought I was supposed to do. And thank God in His sovereignty, I did a lot of things. I hurt a lot of people too, but I got some clarity about this whole thing, what I was called to do. So, you fast forward roughly a decade, a little bit, maybe 7 or 8 years in my early 30s, it started to become a little clearer about what I was sort of going to do. So my whole thing was to begin addressing poverty. I grew up a working class kid, and I lived in a working class neighborhood. I didn't have any idea about poverty and the way that it's characterized in our society. And so I started working with young boys or teenage boys who lived in these low-income communities. And at that time, coming out of seminary, I was an entrepreneur, and I started a little, I guess it would be it wasn't a nonprofit at the time, but my own effort to work with them. And I started getting contracts with County Human Services and all that, and working with some churches to work with these teenage boys. And I I realized after a couple of years of doing that by the time they're teenagers, that's a little too late. And so I said, well, maybe I should work with them when they're a little younger. So I spent another year working with younger boys. And then as I'm working with them, I'm like, wow, this whole thing has got to do with the family systems. And as I'm explaining this, you can hear that my bias was still that there's something wrong with the people, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe I should start working with families and figuring out if I'm working with families, you got to see their families are in these communities. So these low-income communities. So what can we do to address the issues in these low-income communities? So I'm still kind of coming from this idea there's something wrong with these people, as opposed to what I eventually discovered was, no, we got a whole system of things that are perpetrating
the system
on these folks. And so my vocational career then kind of took that trajectory, and I started working with a couple of nonprofit community development corporations. I helped start a couple. One of them won some awards and got some notoriety. We pioneered a couple of strategies for how to do employment work in the community. By not, like, workforce development sort of became a thing in the wake of when Clinton did the Welfare Reform Act in the early 90s, and they wanted to make sure people were being equipped to do jobs. And so a whole lot of people jumped into that pond and started trying to figure out ways to help people get jobs.
Yeah.
And it's centered around, here's how you do a resume, and here's how you can interview, and all of that. And quickly I was like, well, a whole lot of people got jobs that way, but you got to be able to keep a job. That's the real thing. So our work with workforce development turned into, how do we help people keep a job long enough so that it actually transforms their lives in some way.
Yeah.
And so we started doing that, and it became a model for how, at least I'm from Columbus, Ohio, and Franklin County in particular, how they began to fund programming and what workforce development became. It became doing life coaching and mentoring and more protracted support of folks over a period of time so that they could keep jobs as opposed to just get a job. And so we did that. That allowed me to get a little bit of, notoriety in the city. And so getting calls from the Democrats, calls from the Republicans, do I have any interest in politics? And I was like, no, not really. But I did get an opportunity to direct the homeless family shelter in our community. And that was another, sort of eye-opening experience. But I brought that, we need to build people's capacity for sure, but we also need to recognize that there are other forces involved in keeping the cycle of poverty generationally perpetuated and doing the harm to the families and all of that. And when I knew that my role with the homeless family shelter was coming to an end, I established the organization that I have now called Answer Poverty. And at that time, I had some insight about how poverty was perpetuated. Mm-hmm. Certainly, being a racial ethnic minority in our socioeconomic system certainly contributed to, the reasons why people of that, and racial and ethnic minorities were disproportionately, trapped in poverty. But there were a whole lot of other factors that contribute to it as well. So I wanted to start doing training with practitioners to help unpack that insight. And so that's what I started doing. I had help from a private developer who, in one of the communities that I was living and working in, who was doing real estate development. I got got a hold of them and kind of proposed to them that why don't you do something to make sure you're investing in the capacity building of the people in this neighborhood versus the gentrification of the neighborhood and displace all the people who were living there. And they bought it. They thought it was a great idea. And we started to build a workforce development program. They got, they required some of the contractors who were building the housing and stuff in the neighborhood that in their bid packages, they had to agree to hire folks from the neighborhood. We put together a construction training program. And at that point, my reputation was off, it was like, boom. And so that was a really cool season of life. Did a lot of, pretty cool things during that period of time.
And what years were this all?
So this would have been through the 90s.
Okay.
Into the early 2000s.
And this is already Answer Poverty?
Answer Poverty got launched in the early 2000s. And some of what I've just shared began in the wake of that, but some of it started before that. Yeah. So that is, I don't know how, that was pretty long-winded, but that's how I got started in this vocationally, doing this work. And, I should say it this way. I put together a context that would allow me to earn a living doing this work. When I look back, I've been doing it, the whole time.
Right.
But, so anyway.
Yeah. Well, you can take as much time as you want to walk through that, because right now with our current context, there's a lot of reasons to despair, and we need to turn to see people who are doing the creative work that can give us the larger story. So it's good to be able to hear that story, and we'll tease out more of that. Yeah. So in the context then, Keith, from what I understand, as you're developing this church plant with Plism, and what would you want to let folks know about that, and then why you'd want to bring, and with that is, who Robert has been to you.
Yeah. So I could go on and on and on, because like most things, the longer you work with a person, you walk with the person, or the longer a person walks with you, the deeper the appreciation for said person becomes. And that is certainly the case with me and Robert. I think probably over the past few years, I've begun to use the word, he is one of one in my world. I don't know another person clothed in black skin that lives their life so intentionally this way. And he was the answer to the question my life was presenting. And so at a time, I met Robert right during that 2000s period, where he was starting to work with, or attempting to work with, a denomination that I was working with via a local church. And they had, which was pretty common for a lot of predominant white evangelical churches, were kind of caught up in the mood of the day, what was in vogue and sexy by way of missional living in a particular sort of a way. Robert had some connections with them, I'm assuming in the Columbus area, had that notoriety that he spoke of, obviously brought him into conversation with some of the members of this particular denomination. So they invited him to Fort Wayne. I'm being a bit reductionistic. It's probably more nuanced and complex than that. And so one of the flagship churches of this denomination, I was on staff at. And the guy who was the missional director, a brilliant guy, was the one that got introduced to Robert. And so he began to try to bring Robert into the ecosystem of this church to help us imagine a way of responding to those who existed in the margin of the city I was living in, Fort Wayne, Indiana at the time. And I just remember when he came to the church, what resonated with me was what he personified. An intelligent black man who had the wherewithal to go and just make money, and chose to lay his affluence and influence down to serve the least of these. And I desperately needed that example, because I was at that time grappling with who am I going to be? I was getting weary of the church that I was working at for a lot of different reasons. And so like, I need to get the hell up out of here was an impulse, but there was also an impulse. I need to be faithful to my call. In a mega church, you're constantly grappling with, and some cave to it, consumerism, capitalism, cognitive Christian culturism, you know what I mean? And I was fighting the good fight of resisting that, which is what I would like unto the leaven that Jesus cautions us against. You know what I mean? I wanted to be pure. I wanted to be someone who led with integrity of heart and skillful hands. I have always been the kind of person to never forget about who the hell I am. I'm an expression of my ancestors. I am LZ Pruitt's grandson. I am Fannie Mae Sanders' great grandson. I am Jeanette Pruitt's grandson. So in everything I do, I want to make them proud. I don't want to be detached from my journey, my story, and the people that I look like. You know what I mean? And so, but I was trying to find someone who was committed to Jesus, committed to the gospel, committed to local church ministry, but wasn't about consumer-based Christian outcomes. Blow up, get the money, have vocational security, and preach in such a way that you blow up on social media, that sort of a thing. I was like, that ain't it. And in walks Robert Caldwell. Yeah. And everything about him suggested a way of living that was incredibly invitational to me. And so I could say more about that. But as it relates to this church, I'll never forget this story. And you may not remember it, Rob. You were talking at because it's a way to go about the work that Robert illustrates, a way of through the local church, connecting with our neighbors, especially those that exist in the shadows, that it requires a kind of creative approach, a savvy approach, but no less clean hearts, clean hands. You know what I mean? Sure. And so I was just grappling with it. How do you minister to families in urban contexts where they can't give much to support that work? And how do you do it in a way that you don't come under the madness of grants and those expectations and such, all of the things. So Robert told this story of an effort of dealing with generational poverty. And he was at the time, I think you were on staff at one of the larger churches in Columbus. And it was this major campaign that they had launched to raise a bunch of money to do community outreach, and had all kinds of ideas about what they were going to do to meet social needs, and minister to those that were in poverty-stricken environments. And so Robert said, I went to, because he was talking about, I think the topic was like an imagination or an unorthodox approach. If that wasn't the title, it was certainly what you were getting at. So he goes to these directors and he's telling the story, and he says, I tried to get them, I think they were raising 10 million, correct me if I'm wrong. And he said, can you give me 1 million? And they said, for what? And he said, I'll use 1 million to create fake jobs. And the director said, what is a fake job? He said, I will pay them to do random things. And his point was, one of the reasons that poverty revisits generation after generation after generation is because some kids are being raised in homes where they're not seeing anybody get up, get dressed, and go to work. Wow. And I thought, damn. Like, this is who I need to be with, someone who thinks that way. You know what I mean? And who lives that way. And so I met with him, and I've clung to his side ever since. And this was way back. This was probably 2004, I believe. 2004 something, 2004, 2000. Yeah.
That's that long ago.
Around that time. And so, so from then until now, I've not done anything. I've not attempted to do anything that is public without his perspective, without his input. And so our relationship has just deepened. Like he everywhere I have been, he has come to visit. And I'm just coming, including this weekend. I was talking to him about the church plant. We've had conversations, and the last conversation, he just said, I'm coming, and he's here. And so I describe him as a big brother that I never had. I describe him as a mentor and someone who also satisfies that fathership, that really his life touches on how I parent. I mean, I've watched him with his boys. I've called him about difficult things with my kids. Every time we talk, it's how the family doing. And if it ain't good, I ain't gonna lie about it. Yeah. That becomes what we talk about. So, so when I think about this church plant, the ways of Robert Caldwell have shaped it. His example, his perspective, he represents a way of loving Jesus and paradigm for how to do community development, community work via a local church. So
what I hear is it's not necessarily one thing.
Yep.
It's the person.
Yep.
It's the witness.
Yep.